Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the March meeting of the BSA's Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Network. Just as a note, with the exception of the discussion in today's breakout session, we will be recording and sharing this session on the BSA's website as a resource. I'll also remind people to please use the chat function if you have any questions or comments. We will have an open discussion as well. What we really want to use today's session for is the opportunity to share places where we've found opportunity to engage with our community, both as an individual and firm-wide effort. So if you use the chat function, we'll be sharing a lot of those resources and organizations through our EDI network website as well. So please use that function. So our agenda today, we are going to move into the content of the 9th in our series of the topics in the AIA's Guides for Equitable Practice. This is on engaging community. While each of these sessions are designed to be a standalone topic, if you missed the first 8 sessions and are interested in learning more about them, you can find the recordings on our website on the EDI resources page. Oops. So just before we go any further, I just wanted to take a moment to recognize that this is a challenging time for many people in our community, and that we condemn anti-Asian racism in all forms. The BSA and this knowledge community extend our support and commitment to participating in anti-racist work professionally and personally. We also believe that we as designers have a responsibility and opportunity to work together with our communities to create a just and equitable landscape. And we hope that this topic of engaging communities will be a catalyst for all of us to seek out opportunities to do just that. So today, the speakers that we'll have today are our 3 EDI network chairs, Tony Ransom, Dan Riccadelli, and myself, Rachel Zemberry. We also have Rima Abu-Slayman joining us, who is one of the contributors to the BSA Equity and Practice Resource Guide, who will be speaking about community engagement, and Polly Carpenter from the BSA, who will be speaking about a lot of opportunities that are already offered through the BSA. As a reminder, the foundation for this program that we are in our 9th session of is pulled from the AIA's Guide for Equitable Practice. You can find a link to this again through our website, as well as the BSA's Cliff Notes guides that were developed in the summer of this past year. One other item I'll just note is that we have a significant number of firm resources that we have published on the guide. And in fact, this week we'll be publishing resources from a few additional firms, including PCA and Lears Weinzappel, who have recently shared their policies with us. And we really thank them for their generous contributions. And as always, we lead with our intentions about listening to learn and not to be reinforced. And with that, I will kick it over to Rima.
Thanks, Rachel. So as Rachel mentioned, today we're going to talk about community engagement by doing a broad review of the AIA Guides chapter on engaging community, but also by highlighting a range of organizations and local programs that are available for everyone to get involved in. And by having conversations in small and large groups about what our firms are already doing and what they maybe want to do to find some suggestions to push forward. So before we dive into the content, I just want to mention for those of you who have attended the previous sessions, this chapter is pretty distinct because it's one of the few that talk about social impact in the built environment and the role of the architect outside of their office and profession. And so I think that it's worth highlighting before we dive in. Talks a lot about the communities being served and the end users, and not so much about the sort of staff, even though both are very, very important. Next slide, please. All right, so what is community engagement? The guide starts out by defining the essence of community engagement as the inclusion of divergent voices, professionals, stakeholders, and end users to arrive at a consensus about project goals and characteristics with a positive outcome for all. And so this is how they set the stage, but there is a lot of different ways that you as an architect can represent the profession, your firm, and just yourself. And so each of those comes with like a different scale of engagement, which we'll get into. Next slide, please. So what the chapter does a really good job of highlighting is the architect's responsibilities through the lens as an individual citizen and as a representative of the profession, and how each of those roles is unique in the opportunities that they provide. So as an individual, you can join your local planning or zoning board or some other type of neighborhood preservation committee. You can volunteer for a nonprofit. You can help shape public policy. There is sort of a lot of agency you have as a citizen that maybe isn't as obvious as the role that a firm could play, but still very, very important. And we're not going to answer these questions now necessarily, but just something to think about as we move through the presentation and the breakout room. What is the architect's role as a citizen and as a professional in engaging with their communities? Why is it important for the architect to be fluent in engagement as a professional and a citizen? And this graphic on the right comes from the guide and is suggesting a framework for practitioners to consider community engagement as part, in a holistic way, as part of the entire design process, and not sort of bring it in as an extra thing to do after the project has already been pretty developed. And so the idea here is that the three tiers work together to consider social equity and environmental well-being in this way that then becomes integrated with the design. So you have the outer tier that's all of the preconditions for a project, market conditions, commitments from all of the parties. And then as you go in, sort of project goals and design needs, and then the design at the center. Next slide, please. So feeding off that second question on the previous slide, why does community engagement matter? And why is it important for the architect to be involved in this process? We all know, and the guide I think does a good job of recognizing that the architect's contractual obligation is obviously with the client, but it's important to keep in mind that what the architect produces and designs and builds will affect the lives of a host of individuals that are not necessarily the client and might not typically be involved in the process, even though they will be experiencing it sometimes more than the client maybe. And they sort of call on architects to use their voice and agency to negotiate community engagement as part of the contract from the very beginning, so that everybody is clear about their intention, and that can be folded into the process and the project scope from the very beginning, because as we know, if it's not, it's sort of hard to achieve later in the game. And it's also important because it bridges the gap between designers and communities, helps sort of increase the visibility of the profession, both in a way to make architecture as a career more viable to a larger range of people, and to help build a recruitment pipeline, which will help increase diversity in the profession. And they talk a lot about allowing the profession to remain relevant in a world where everybody is caring more and more about equitable engagement in the work that they do, as well as in their personal lives. It is pretty critical to engage in that so that we can continue attracting a great group of future practitioners. And then lastly, these components and some examples for successful engagement. Connection, so fully engaging the users and the community in the project process. Trust, having a mutual respect between the architect and the community of both knowledge of each party and their ideas. alignment, making sure that the architect understands the user's needs and reflects them in the design, doesn't assume anything, but really listens. And then power, making sure that the design team seeks out many voices in the community, particularly those with less power and privilege. So branching out and making sure that if people can attend community meetings, for example, that they are still having a chance to share their perspective. And so all of these 4 components that are talked about have a really similar theme. They're all focused on communication and making sure that the architect isn't making assumptions about communities' needs and is really carefully listening and responding thoughtfully with their proposed design. Thanks.
So as Rima mentioned, we're just going to do one breakout room as part of today's session. And so we've just included 2 prompts here. So one, to introduce yourself to the small group, and then 2, to speak about what type of community engagement work does your firm do, or do they encourage staff members to engage in on their own? And if you're at a smaller firm, a sole practitioner, or you're just looking for ideas, we encourage you all to knowledge share about what sort of community engagement you've seen that you really like, or as an example of the type of work you'd like to be doing, either within your firm or as just as a member of this group. So I'll be putting these questions in the chat, and I'll be putting everyone to breakout groups now. We'll have about 10 minutes for the breakout group, and I will give everyone a 1-minute warning before we come back to the larger group. The last thing before I break everyone up, since we're just doing one breakout room today, if each group could just kind of designate one person to bring back their thoughts to the larger group, knowing that the larger group session will be recorded, but the breakout room will not be, that would be fantastic. Okay. Okay, I'm opening rooms now. Welcome back, everyone. Apologies for cutting off what I'm sure were fantastic conversations all around. But keep that energy up because we'll bring our thoughts back to the larger group towards the end of the session. So I'll hand it back over to Rima to keep going with the presentation.
Thanks. So there's a lot of importance placed on engaging in an authentic way, not just engaging when it's convenient or when you want to, but in creating these connections and sort of nurturing them so that you are a resource for the community when they need some sort of architectural intervention. And so they really stress that there are ways that you can ensure that your engagement is authentic and that you're not just sort of parachuting in when you want and parachuting out. So building relationships with community, as I said, sharing information that encourages participation. And in the breakout room, we just talked about like in formats that are accessible to all. So not just providing graphics that you know how to read, like a plan or a section, but providing videos or 3D views that really help individuals who aren't in the profession understand what the end goal is. And then reaching out to a wide range of members to increase the perspectives, making sure that you're not just holding one type of sort of design charrette event or feedback event at the same time of day on the same day, but making a range of opportunities for people to attend to see what works best with different schedules so that you're gathering as many sort of diverse voices and perspectives as you can. And then similarly attending community events, not just going in when you need feedback, but going in when something is happening to show your support and engage. Next slide, please. So the next few slides are just suggestions of ways that as firms and as individuals, you can get involved in community engagement. So this is one organization, One Plus AIA. It's a program by Public Architecture, but is done in collaboration with the AIA. And the idea is to encourage architects to engage in pro bono work and make design services more accessible. And the challenge is to exceed that 1%, but the sort of benchmark is that 1% of total staff working hours goes to pro bono design services. And it's really good because thinking about engaging in pro bono work might feel daunting, not necessarily knowing how to set it up, but One Plus does a good job of providing the framework and sort of roadmap for how to engage in this. And as a disclaimer, Brunner Cott recently joined the initiative, so I know a little bit about it if anybody has any questions. Next slide, please. I think this is Polly.
Yeah, thanks, Rima. As many of you know, and many of you have been involved in lots of K-12 initiatives, I run the K-12 initiatives for the BSA, and this is a chart we've been working on with a coalition that we have of a lot of different groups across the city, kind of looking at where architecture programming is introduced to students across the age group, from pre-K all the way up to high school. And in that sense, kind of looking where the BSA really should focus our efforts. We've typically been working mostly with sort of pre-K to grade 8, which, as you can see, has got the least amount of opportunities. But those highlighted groups are programs that are free to students, and then the shaded ones are ones that students have to pay for, and then the ones on the top above that, the dark outline, are opportunities where students receive a stipend for their participation. So many of these organizations use volunteers to be involved in their programs. Some do, some don't, and I'm happy to talk to people who are interested in specific organizations, and connect you with them. As well as we are this kind of design ed coalition that we work together. And many of you on the call, as I said, sort of know this. And then the next slide just are kind of a few some opportunities that are happening. Again, many of you on the call are involved in these specifically with our, partnerships with Boston Public Schools, which are mostly in the K-8 realm. So these are really you all as architects thinking about how you want to be involved. Do you want to be involved with youth? I mean, some people like kids and some people prefer not to work with kids. So as well as sort of what's your age range. And for us, we really feel like K-8 for us at the BSA is a really important time frame to get involved with students. And then looking at the high school age, it's really much more about career development, students who have already chosen towards architecture, engineering, construction, supporting them in their path. So they're almost a little bit of two different ways to thinking about engaging with students. But here are all these different opportunities, some at the BSA, some in public schools, as well as, we've heard today already earlier about the Design Museum. Bosnoma is doing a middle school camp this summer, which Rima can speak about more as well. And I think many of you are involved with ACE mentoring. So as I'm hoping to continue to grow this ecosystem and also create a place on the BSA website where all of these things are clear and offered, and it's a place for you all to go to find what you're looking for. I think that's it.
Thanks, Polly. So just a couple of other ways to get involved. We thought that these knowledge communities do a really good job of engaging with communities, and there are probably many others, but this is our first pass at a list. The Global Design Initiative for Refugee Children. They design playscapes for refugee camps around the world. The Urban Design Committee, Open Architecture Collaborative Boston, the AIA Massachusetts Government Affairs Committee, it's more policy focused, and then the Housing Committee. And as has been mentioned a few times, there is a lot of value in volunteering in your local community boards with the sort of perspective that the architectural profession provides us. So planning boards, design committees, arts councils, neighborhood preservation boards. There are a lot of opportunities to get involved in the community you live in, as well as the Boston examples we looked at, which is the community we all work in. So now we thought this would be a good time to talk as a large group, similar to what we talked about in the breakout rooms. Does your firm participate in any community engagement efforts? But as a larger group, we could sort of spread that knowledge further. And then maybe talking a little bit about what the process was like for that. And if you have any advice for firms looking to get started. And if you do not currently engage in community engagement efforts, but you want to, maybe sharing what you're looking for and seeing if anybody in the group has any suggestions would be good. And then we talked a lot about some organizations, but if anybody has any other opportunities or programs that they want to highlight, feel free. And we'll sort of document what's being shared to then share it with folks later.
So I think maybe if we could start off by any of the representatives from any of the breakout rooms who had some interesting topics that were brought to the forefront that might want to start sharing in that way, that would be a great way. Or if anyone has any questions too for Polly, I know that we went through really briefly what some of the wonderful programs are for K-12 education that the BSA is involved with. We'd certainly could start through that. But again, we're just going to open it up for an open forum, however people would like to start sharing what they've been involved in and what's been meaningful, or how they'd like to become more involved in the future.
Yeah, Argo could go. This is Carol. Sumi or Sarah or Tony, do you want to share?
Go for it, Carol.
Okay. Well, everyone's doing something. And I think Sumi's involved in engaging with kindergartners through a program that Polly has. Payette's doing a number of different things around a day of service on MLK Day, and they actually pulled that off virtually this year, as well as being engaged in a pro bono program and sort of linking things. And then Tony talked about the things he's doing through NOMA, through DCAM, and sort of understanding the linkages between those, and talked about a little bit about the strategies NOMA has for Project Pipeline this summer, which I think making that visible to people so they see the opportunity to engage struck me. And then at Shepley, we just talked about some of the things we're doing with NOMA, Project Pipeline, really focused on middle schoolers and high schoolers. And what we're working on is a more structured framework that's a little bit about encouragement and permission to get engaged. And so we're developing a corporate responsibility framework that might be more clear with all of our employees of that everyone's encouraged to get engaged, because we feel like they're the folks that by nature lean in and just choose to do it without even asking permission. And those are great, but they're the leaders. It doesn't necessarily bring everyone in our organization along.
That's a great point, Carol.
No, in response to that, it just struck me, I wanted to mention something that I had a conversation with AIA Western Massachusetts, about 6 months ago. And I suggested this JEDI forum where justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, where maybe if firms can consider it, they need to like set up, let's say like a project with hours attached to it that their staff could actually bill against if they went out to visit schools, high schools, elementary schools, to discuss architecture, etc., with the students there, to encourage them to also look at this as a profession, and that therefore they could bill that time against that quote unquote JEDI project, to give them more of to empower them to actually take these opportunities.
I don't know how many folks in this group work for firms that have a JUST label, but I think the most recent iteration of JUST includes this like volunteer category where you can offer, I think it's 0, 16, or 32 maybe hours to your employees to take sort of like PTO, but specifically for volunteer time. And so for firms who have a JUST label, that might be a good way to integrate that into their policies.
Mm-hmm.
And I just add one thing, and then we can hear from another group is more and more our clients are asking about this. So for the folks who are, I feel like there's the stragglers that aren't sure that they're supposed to participate or not. It's becoming a business imperative to show that you're engaged in your community and engaged in JEDI or JUST or equity activities. And especially in the last year, almost every RFP we receive asks for what our participation is in our community, how we're addressing diversity in our firm, in our community, in our profession. So for the stragglers, I think it's going to become a business imperative, which I think is exciting because it just stops the discussion about should we or shouldn't we and moves everyone into action.
That's great. Did anyone else who'd like to volunteer, either what you're working on, what you heard in your breakout room, or even just to promote a program that you're really excited that you're a part of?
Can everybody hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Who's calling?
My sound went out like partway through. I'm back in action though. Okay. So in our breakout group, one of the programs we talked about with Andrea from Payette was their Mlk Day of Service, which came up a little bit already, but the way they structure it, they have an RFP process that interested organizations that want to participate are vetted and then are given the sort of heads up that this is kind of a one-day activity. The deliverable is pretty clear. And they have been able to run it pretty successfully, even virtually. And a program that we're working on at Bergmeyer right now to get more engagement with the youth in our community is participating in the designing program at Youth Build, which has also come up in conversation as a sort of co-sponsored idea by our EDI committee as well as our social responsibility team to understand how we can get more engagement and more involvement with students and get interest in the youth in architecture and design. So we're currently involved with them right now in a design project where there's about 5 of us from Bergmeyer with a group of about 15 students from Youth Build that we're working with and mentoring, helping them with a design project that it's a design for a community fridge shelter, which obviously with the pandemic, there's a lot of heightened awareness of food insecurity in our neighborhoods. So we're, as part of the project, they're designing a shelter for a community refrigerator, identifying locations for them, and then hopefully this summer we'll actually be able to build some of them. So it's something that they can connect their own, issues that are occurring in their own neighborhoods to design and how they can actually solve real world problems with design. So it's been really great so far. And we hopefully after this experience can encourage other firms to get more involved in similar activities as well.
Brian, so I'll introduce, that was Brian Fontaine, one of my colleagues from Bergmeyer. Brian, do you want to just talk a little bit about some of the work too that you did together with the AGC and United Way, trying to pair together? It was kind of a neat way to do some service and also meet some folks from the construction world.
Yeah, so we have done some through the United Way and partnering with some other organizations in the past with Boston Properties and Gilbane. We've put on some fun activities through the Boys and Girls Club of Boston. We did a carnival. We've done it a couple times where we've worked together with our partner organizations and have been able to, not only bring some joy and happiness to the kids in the community, but also be able to engage with others in our industry and construction and property management and make some connections through that, which has been really great too. Hopefully, again, we'll be able to do more of this kind of stuff in person, but we've been trying to do as much as we can virtually as well.
Thanks. Anyone else? We had some interesting conversation. I don't know if Diane or Kelsey or anyone from our breakout group wanted to talk. Really, some really interesting conversations about how to drive greater civic engagement in terms of opening up and making things more accessible for the communities that we work in, and to educate our own staff about how to about what happens in community forums as well.
I know this wasn't my contribution, but I definitely think one of the things that I thought was most kind of important coming out of our subgroup discussion was about the accessibility in terms of, languages used for community engagement, and that making sure that, that you are actually effectively communicating with the members of the community that you're trying to engage with, and being cognizant of, what is the kind of language composition of the group, and if, it's hard to know if it's the majority, but I think even if it's a substantial portion of it, we should be considerate of making sure things are translated or even being offered primarily in the language of the kind of audience that we're trying to reach out to.
Great, thanks, Kelsey.
And to follow up on Kelsey, I think it's kind of interesting because we did have this theme of just breaking down barriers and this idea of accessibility. And the other idea that came out of the group that was on theme was using technology such as VR to help communicate ideas, since everyone's not fluid at being able to sort of translate 2D images into a 3D sense of space and volume. and being able to lean on technology to be able to try to help communicate in new and better ways.
Yeah, one of the interesting things that I also took from the conversation that we had in our breakout room was how the pandemic and the shift to running virtual community meetings actually in some ways widened accessibility and the ability for groups and types of people that might not normally be able to attend civic meetings and events to have access and to be able to participate, or even just to listen in to understand how decisions in their communities are made. And it's interesting, I think, that a lot of communities are right now wrestling with how do we continue to foster this type of engagement, but also recognize that people do want to start doing things in person again when that's an option, and how do we design a new version of a public meeting that's a hybrid of the two. So I think as designers who are so often engaged in presenting or serving on boards and doing a lot of those things, it's going to fall to us to be part of the solution in terms of leading what that new version of public engagement looks like.
I had just a question that I was thinking of from one of your comments about sort of encouraging volunteering as part of the firm. And I think Rima mentioned as part of the JUST label, there's a requirement about volunteerism or what the standards are for that. But I think that in the past, I know my company has had this debate several times about whether we should do a day of service where the whole company is sort of shut down in order to encourage that sort of volunteering and community outreach aspect, or whether that the cost to shut down the whole business for a day should more be better used, making donations to organizations and having flexible schedules that allow people to volunteer when it's most convenient for them. So I guess I'm just sort of asking this group if people have a thought one way or the other. I think sort of the day of service model is a very classic business model, and that hasn't always translated into the design community quite so well. So.
And to your point, Dan, I think that there's lots of different solutions. What PCA decided to do as their solution, we felt like we had already a good practice of volunteering within the organization, across the organization. And so as far as kind of like using the JUST framework and this concept of paying people for their time, we felt like that was actually sort of taking a step back, is people already sort of understood the value of their time and investing that in the community. So what we decided to do within our policies is we have some flexibility so people can volunteer during the daytime and use daytime hours to reach out, backpack programs, things like that we were already established in. And then you could submit your time so as opposed to paying the individual, if you submit your time that you have volunteered, then the organization matches your time as paid time and gives that money as a donation to that same organization. And they do that at a living wage of $25 an hour across the board.
That's fantastic. I hadn't heard about that model before, so thank you for sharing. That's great.
Absolutely.
This is Andrea Love from Payette. I think it's also worth thinking about what sort of time you're giving. So for our MLK Day of Service, we give design services, which is, I think, something that not other people can kind of offer in a kind of pro bono way, as opposed to, previously we'd done things like a river cleanup or painting, and not to say that those aren't important things for the community to do, but I think we felt it was important as a firm to kind of give back design services, in particular to those that need them and can't afford them.
Yeah, I really admire that about the day of service model, especially because it's hard to generate the type of design graphics that we are just trained to produce. And for somebody to want to get funding or sort of share the message of their project, graphics are so crucial. And being able to provide them with that, I think, is really great.
I'll speak a little to what we do at Bergmeyer. So we have what we call a VTO, volunteer time off program, where each employee can use 8 hours of volunteer work as they choose. So throughout the year, we usually try to set up Bergmeyer sponsored events that people can use their hours to volunteer for, whether it's through like this youth build program we're working with, which is oftentimes in the afternoon. We've done worked with like the Red Cross food pantry for a morning to help distribute food, things like that. But additionally, we give people the option to volunteer with the organizations that, you know, have more meaning to them, or organizations that they might volunteer with on a regular basis. So we offer the flexibility to volunteer where you choose or through our own sponsored activities. And we also have a match program for, you know, that if you want to make a charitable contribution to an organization of your choosing, Bergmeyer will match it up to a certain amount. So that way our financial contributions are going towards organizations that, again, are meaningful and near and dear to the employees.
Thanks, Brian. And I see, Carol, you mentioned here that it would be great to share the various models or create a place for them. If anyone does want to share their models, we actually have a great link on the EDI Network's resource page that shares various policies and practices that firms have established. And one of them specifically is on volunteerism, whether it's paid time off policies or charitable giving. And so if you have something that you'd love to share from your organization, please don't hesitate to send that to me, and I'd love to upload that so that other people can have visibility. So for example, I just received one within the last couple of months from PCA that'll be going up on the site this week, and we have a few other examples on there already, but I'd love to have more. So please don't hesitate to send those to me, and our emails will be at the end of this presentation. All right, any other comments? I think we'll move to the wrap up unless there are a couple other things that people would like to share. Thanks. All right, and we'll also encourage people to please reach out to Polly. I know that there are a lot of great programs that she had highlighted that are going on right now, and you know, things like the PICS summer intern program, et cetera, that if those sounded of interest to you, there are opportunities right now that are available for all firms and individuals to become involved in.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk to anyone who has not already signed up to host a high school intern this summer. Please reach out. Interviews are starting soon, and we'd love to get as many students as we can in paid 6-week internships. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Polly. All right, so Tony, I will turn it over to you.
All right. Okay, we always like to give a little recap of the thoughts we've had during this session. So in this case, for firms, do you want your firm to get involved in community engagement efforts? And what can you do as a member of your firm's community to move this forward? I think we just sort of covered some of that in our conversations. But I think part of it is, as a leader, to take the first step. And then once you've taken that step, maybe you can reach back to the people in your firm and they can follow your lead in moving forward on these type of ideas. As for individuals, as I said, is there a specific type of work or organization you like to be involved with? Take that step. What can you do as the individual to move this forward? And as long as you're leading the way by example, I think, yes, you can bring others along to work with you in that endeavor. We go to the next slide. Okay. In response to that too, and this event we're having, I know there's a couple people have left. Before they do, I wanted to bring up something. I just thought about this the other night, and I finally was able to find it because I couldn't remember the name of it. But in 2010, the AIA came up with a guide called Living Your Life as a Leader. Okay? And it's actually basically about community engagement. Now, the original version was done in 2010, which I kind of liked a bit because of some of the esoteric ideas and the quotes in there. But they currently have a third edition published in 2016. And it is something that I'm going to bring up to the On the Same Page Edi Book Club this Friday. I haven't been attending, but it's something I think that they should consider suggesting that people read, because it really talks about community engagement, leadership concepts, whether you're as a servant leader, the citizen architect, or you engage in what's called followership a few years ago. Every leader needs followers. If you find something that you think you're interested in, help the person leading it to make it better. So that's some of the things we cover on the EDI Network Book Club, which hopefully some of you will attend this Friday at noon. Also, our Boston chapter of the National Organization of Minority Architects is having its monthly virtual meeting on the 30th between 6 and 7:30. Please contact the BSA through its calendar to get the Zoom link in case you don't already have it. And our next series, we've been covering this a bit for the last 8 weeks or so. And now we have another one coming up in April called Measuring Progress. How well are we doing? And how do we understand that? So hopefully you'll join us next month for our next presentation.
Thanks, Tony. And I'll just also highlight that that will be the last in our series on the guides for equitable practice. Obviously, those will guide a lot of our discussions going forward, but we will be moving into a new type of programming, starting with the program in May. So that will be a panel discussion on the JUST program, where we'll have representatives from different size firms who will talk about their experience going through the JUST program and what the JUST program provides for us all as a framework for organizations. And then our June program, which is just being finalized now, will be a joint meeting with the Higher Ed and SCUP committee on issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion on higher ed campuses, and how we as designers, what an important role we as designers have as members of the higher ed community. And with that, we thank you all for joining us today. We thank you all for also participating in such a wonderful conversation today.
All right.
Have a great afternoon.
All right. Take care, everyone, and send us emails if you need anything.
Thanks, everybody. Great to see you.
Good to see you
Take
too.
care now.
Bye.